When you think of villains in any fantasy world, whether in video games or novels, orcs as a race immediately come to mind, with a penchant for violence and human flesh. These fearsome humanoids have plagued the denizens of many a fantasy world. Over the years, their depiction has evolved to be accepted as just another race, usually misunderstood due to their appearance and characteristics in many worlds, like the Elder Scrolls and Warcraft. The origins of their current reputation as these fearsome, bloodthirsty warrior races is largely owed to their depiction in J.R.R. Tolkien's books set in the land of Middle-earth. Tolkien essentially laid down a template of what we know as orcs today, which has been modified and emulated by various creators over the years. Orcs have a special place within Tolkien's legendarium. While they serve to function as the primary servants of the Dark Lords Morgoth and Sauron, Tolkien has crafted an extremely extensive lore, fleshing out their origins, breed, power hierarchy, etc., etc. It is therefore unsurprising that just like the myriad of races that dwell within Middle-earth, there have been orcs who earned great infamy and renown as well. These evil creatures were, however, not always this way. Theirs is a tragic origin story, one wrought with betrayal and torture. There are several versions of their origins that Tolkien has flirted with, but the one that we're going to present to you is widely accepted to be the real one. In the early periods of the First Age of Middle-earth, the elves, who were the creation of Eru Ilúvatar, the one true god of Tolkien's universe, awoke under the starlight near Lake Cuiviénen in Middle-earth. There, they dwelt in peace and harmony for a time before they were found by the Valar Orome, who beheld them and knew them to be the Eldar, or elves as they'd be known thenceforth. Orome invited the elves to the undying lands of Valinor, where they could dwell forever under the grace and protection of the Valar. This resulted in a mass exodus of elves from Middle-earth into Valinor. However, not all accepted the invitation of the Valar and journeyed west. Some had become too enamored by the starry skies and the land underneath them. Others didn't make the journey because they didn't fully trust Orome and the Valar. These elves had been known thereafter by their kin as Avari, which meant the unwilling in their language, Quenya. Around this time, Melkor, or Morgoth as he's popularly known, had already fallen into darkness, deeply coveting the imperishable flame in order to create life just like his master. He desired to rule over the land of Adar, or Middle-earth, and dominate all those who lived in it. Morgoth was, however, not able to create life, and resorted to twisting and corrupting Eru's creation in mockery of them, as he was jealous and wrathful of their beauty. He'd kidnap or lure some of these Avari elves with false promises, and once ensnared, through various dark arts and torture, he twisted these fair beings to become the first orcs. The very existence of the orcs is an affront to Eru and all of creation, as they were created to spite him. The orcs would then multiply within the deep, dark caverns of the earth and would rise up as the primary soldiers of their tormentor and creator, Morgoth, and later, Sauron. This is how the orcs were created and were unleashed as a scourge upon the lands of Middle-earth. As time passed by, there'd be a number of different tribes and hybrids of orcs that had come into existence, like the Uruk-hai and Goblins. We'll include Goblins in our list, even though they seem to have been intended to be a different race by the author. The word, however, is often used interchangeably with orcs in the books. In this video, we'll highlight some of the most powerful and infamous orcs to have existed in Middle-earth, along with some that you might not even have heard of. With Amazon's The Lord of the Rings Rings of Power Season 2 currently underway, we thought this would be as good a time as any to make a video like this, as we're going to be seeing plenty of orcs in the coming days. We therefore would ask you to stick around right to the end of the video to find out everything about them. For the purpose of the video, we've done an arbitrary power level ranking to show you just how much these orcs measured up to each other, and their impact on the stories they're a part of. So, without further ado, here's the power tier list of the top 13 orcs that have plagued the land of Middle-earth.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Reach out the iron hand of the Uruk and close our fist around these lands.
Adar, level 40,000. One of the main antagonists of the Lord of the Rings Rings of Power show, produced by Amazon Studios, Adar has been a beacon of light in a somewhat maligned series otherwise. The Rings of Power takes cues from Tolkien's origin myths for the orcs and gives them their own twist. According to the Rings of Power, there were 13 elves specifically chosen by Morgoth to be corrupted and twisted. These elves were known as the Moriandors and were seduced by Morgoth's promise of power, but were instead tortured and turned into abominations, mere shadows of their glorious former selves. Adar is one of these Moriandors, and we're told by him that he was tied up on a nameless peak, where he was tortured and starved for countless days. Sauron would then appear one day and offer him a drink, thinking it to be red wine, and being thirsty beyond belief, Adar would accept the drink, after which he'd be forever changed. He'd become one of the first orcs to roam the lands of Middle-earth, hence earning him the moniker of the Father of Orcs by the subsequent generations of his kind. Adar commands respect and reverence from the orcs exactly like a father would over his children. He reciprocates these feelings, as he's shown deeply caring caring for the well-being of his so-called children. Adar is an extremely important part of the show's take on the Orcs and their lore, as he's posed as an alternative to Sauron. With the depiction of an Orc family consisting of a male and female Orc with a child, the show seems to be trying to paint Orcs as just another misunderstood race trying to find their place in the world that hates them. Adar seems to be a key factor in pushing this plot, as he's shown to be almost a messiah for the Orcs, looking to deliver them from their fate and help them settle down. While this is wildly outlandish from Tolkien's intent for the Orcs, it simply highlights Adar's power and importance amongst his kind. We're told for the longest time that Adar had served Morgoth, and after the first Dark Lord's fall, he'd served Sauron as his lieutenant. He'd eventually betray the new Dark Lord after having grown disillusioned with Sauron, using his children as cannon fodder to further his goals. Adar would then assassinate Sauron with the aid of his followers, which would leave him as the sole figurehead for the Orcs to follow. He'd then orchestrate the eruption of Mount Doom and transform the Southlands into Mordor in order to carve a home for his people. Adar is shown to be a charismatic leader, commanding the loyalty of the Orcs enough for them to betray an immensely powerful being such as Sauron. He's also shown to have retained much of his physical appearance, along with the strength and agility of his elven past. As such, Adar is an extremely gifted warrior who not only excels in combat, but is a shrewd tactician as well. He manages to defeat an entire host of Númenóreans, along with the men of the Southland in the Battle of the Southland. Even though he's a show-exclusive character, he's arguably the most powerful Orc in all of Lord of the Rings extended universe. It is therefore only appropriate that we rank him right at the top with the power level of 40,000. The tale of this father of Orcs is not yet over, and we can't wait to see what further impact he'll have in the lore and story of Middle-earth. Bulg, level 20,000. Bulg was a powerful Orc chieftain who served as the leader of the Northern Orcs, also known as the Gundabad Orcs. These were the Orcs who, after the War of Wrath and the fall of the Thangorodrim peaks and Morgoth's fortress of Angbad, scattered into the northern realms of Middle-earth. Without a Dark Lord to guide them, they'd form war bands and tribes and engage in conflicts between themselves and the dwarves and men who lived in the region. Bulg would rise up after the death of his father, Azog, another important Orc whom we'll discuss later in the video, and continue his father's legacy by taking his place as the leader of these Northern Orcs. In the movies, Bulg is shown as having pale white skin, just like his father, Azog. His stature and build are reminiscent of an Uruk-hai or an Uruk Orc, rather than the Orcs of Gundabad, who were slightly hunched or shorter. It's quite clear by just laying your eyes on Bulg that he's different from the rest of his kind. Just like his father, Bulg is pitiless and cruel, with a sadistic streak that's unmatched by any of the Orcs during his period. He's shown to be a shrewd tactician, capable of matching wits with the greatest generals of the time. Unlike his depiction in the Hobbit films, where he's shown mostly as a lieutenant to his father, in the book, he is the sole leader of the Orcs. In the Battle of the Five Armies, he'd lead the Orcs into battle against the Elves, Men of Dale, and Dwarves. This was one of the biggest and most important battles to take place in the Third Age after the fall of the dragon Smaug. Here, Bulg would immortalize his name by slaying countless foes in battle. Bulg had inherited his father's ferocity and battle prowess, which made him a formidable foe. In the movies, he's shown going toe-to-toe with the likes of Legolas, who we know to be one of the greatest warriors of the time. In the books, he's slain by Beorn, the Skin Changer, while in the movie, he dies at the hands of Legolas. We can therefore safely say that Bulg is one of the most powerful Orcs that Tolkien described to us, and his impact on Middle-earth, and especially the dwarves, is unmistakable.
Azog, the Defiler.
Azog, level 16,000. We first hear of Azog from Gandalf in The Hobbit, when he's speaking to Thorin Oakenshield. He tells the dwarf, "Your grandfather Thror was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin." Azog the Defiler, or Azog the Goblin as he's known, was a great Orc lord that appeared in the annals of Middle-earth around the year 2079 of the Third Age. Thror, the Dwarven king, would seek to visit his ancient lost kingdom of Khazad-dûm, which had been abandoned by the dwarves ever since they'd awakened the Balrog, Durin's bane. He set out for Moria with a companion known as Nar, but arriving at the gates of Moria, he was beset by Orcs led by their leader, Azog. Azog would slay the Dwarven king by beheading him and then carve his name on Thror's head. He'd then toss the body outside to where Nar was and bid him tell the dwarves that any beggars that entered Moria and attempted thievery would be met with the same fate. To add further insult to injury, the Orc would toss a small pouch full of coins at the surviving dwarf. Nar would take this pouch and run away to inform his kin of what had transpired. As he ran away, he looked back and witnessed the Orcs hacking away at the body of Thror and feeding it to the carrion birds. Azog would then declare himself king of Moria. Upon learning of this tragedy, the dwarves would begin preparation for a great war against the Orcs. This war would last for 9 years, finally culminating in a battle known as the Battle of Azana Bulzar. The dwarves would earn a Pyrrhic victory as they'd lose a number of their own, including the likes of Fundin and Nain, the latter of whose son Dane Ironfoot would finally slay the Great Orc. The dwarves, having suffered great losses as well, along with the fact that Dane had glimpsed Dorin's bane inside Moria, decided not to pursue the Orcs into their lost realm. The head of Azog was impaled upon a spear, and the coin purse that he threw at Nar was stuffed inside his mouth. Thus the dwarves avenged their king and slayed their great enemy. The control of his warband would pass on to his son Bulg, who would continue his father's legacy. In the Hobbit trilogy by Peter Jackson, Azog is merely injured at the Battle of Azana Bulzar and is one of the primary antagonists of the films. He takes on what is originally his son Bulg's role in the story. While we have mixed feelings about this and much prefer his tale in the books, his legacy and impact on the world of Lord of the Rings is undeniable.
Do you know how the Orcs first came into being?
Lurtz, level 12,000. During the War of the Ring in the Third Age, the wizard Saruman, in a bid to deliver the kingdom of Rohan to his master Sauron, would build an army worthy of Mordor. His army would consist of numerous fell things, like orcs, wargs, and the wild men of the north, but the strongest and the most powerful of his warriors would be his creation, known as the Uruk-hai, not to be mistaken with the Uruks of Mordor, who were a stronger breed of orcs that closely resembled their cousins in Isengard. It is speculated that the Uruk-hai were created by Saruman through fell magic and sorcery that resulted in the successful crossbreeding of the wild men and orcs. The first of these warriors was called Lurtz, and he's a movie-exclusive character created just for the Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson. Lurtz's birth itself was marked with violence, as he kills the first orc that he sees within mere seconds of his birth. The captain of the Uruk-hai is built powerfully and is extremely strong. Just like the rest of his kind, he's seen as being able to operate at full power, even under direct sunlight. In the Tolkien world, orcs can't operate under daylight to their fullest potential, but by creating Uruk-hai, Saruman circumvented this crucial weakness. Lurtz was part of the band of Uruk-hai that ambushed the Fellowship of the Ring at Amon Hen. There, he'd slay the captain of Gondor and a member of the Fellowship, Boromir, with his arrows. However, before he could land the final killing blow, he's confronted by Aragorn, the leader of the Fellowship, and after a hard-fought battle, is decapitated and slain. While most Uruk-hai are shown to wield blades and prefer melee combat, at least in the movies, Lurtz is shown to be an adept archer as well. Of all the orcs that we'll discuss, Lurtz is perhaps the most complete warrior. He's actually able to not only slay Boromir using his cunning, but also go toe-to-toe with arguably the greatest warrior in all of Middle-earth at the time, Aragorn. Even when impaled by the King of Gondor, the orc shows immense durability and resistance to pain by continuing to walk through the sword until he's beheaded. He plays a vital role in the breaking up of the Fellowship of the Ring, as after the death of Boromir, Frodo and Sam set out on their own while Aragorn, Gimli and Legolas begin their pursuit of the Uruk-hai, who had captured Merry and Pippin, mistaking them to be the ring bearers. Thus we feel, thanks to his impact on the lore and his feats of strength, he deserves this power level and this spot on our list.
A bit off the flank.
Ugluk, level 10,000. While this was a tough choice between the Great Goblin and Ugluk, we feel that the Uruk-hai deserves this place on the list. Ugluk was the original leader of the Uruk-hai, who pursued and waylaid the Fellowship at Amon Hen. After his group slays Boromir, he manages to kidnap Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, two of the hobbits in the Fellowship. In the books, he's shown to have the tactical acumen to lead his band of Uruks in such a way that not only are they able to slay a great warrior like Boromir, but also thwart the likes of Gimli, Aragorn and Legolas before kidnapping the two hobbits. He seems to be fiercely loyal to Saruman, and in the movies, he naturally replaces Lurtz after the latter's death. Ugluk forces his company of Uruk-hai to march relentlessly without rest towards Isengard. On the way there, on the edge of Fangorn Forest, they're met by Grishnak and his orcs from Mordor. After disagreements break out between the two groups regarding the fate of their prisoner, Ugluk slays one of Grishnak's orcs, and an all-out fight breaks out. During this time, they're waylaid by Eomer and his men, who, after being banished from Rohan, were roving the country, slaying any foul creatures they encountered. Ugluk would be slain in this battle, and that'd be the last time we'd hear about him. Despite a pretty ignominious death, his role in breaking up the Fellowship, along with his leadership qualities and loyalty to his master, has a pretty profound impact on the story. Unlike the Great Goblin, Ugluk was more hands-on in combat, and we argue, a much better tactician and leader. He was always in the thick of the conflict, unlike the Great Goblin, who mostly liked to delegate the fighting to his minions. Despite the size of the Great Goblin, an Uruk's fighting prowess shouldn't be underestimated, especially one as powerful as Ugluk, and we believe the latter would have slain the former. This is why we think a power level of 10,000 is justified for this Uruk-hai leader. Great Goblin, level 9000. The Great Goblin was a significantly larger orc chieftain that dwelt in the caves of the Misty Mountains. He was the ruler of an orc settlement known as Goblin Town. There, he'd prey on the travelers who used the mountain pass and passed by the entrance to these caves. Due to his size, Great Goblin was an anomaly amongst his kind. He was bigger than even the largest Orcs and stood almost as tall as a troll. Thanks to his enormous size, he commanded an air of intimidation, which he used to control all the orcs under him. Fortunately for him, he'd capture Bilbo and his companions while they were en route to Adar. This would result in a great conflict between the Great Goblin and the members of the Dwarven party. Gandalf would engage him in single combat and slay the giant orc using his elven blade Glamdring, which the orcs called the Beater. There's no doubt that he plays an integral part in the Lords of the Ring, because without him capturing Bilbo and his party, there's no way that Bilbo travels down the caverns where he comes across Gollum and the One Ring, setting in motion the events of the Lord of the Rings. His impact was further felt after his death, as it'd be one of the triggers that would incite the Battle of the Five Armies, which is the primary battle in the Hobbit books. It's undeniable that the Great Goblin had a great impact in shaping the history of the Lord of the Rings, and he could easily replace some of the orcs above him purely on his impact on the lore. Balrog, level 7000. Balrog is not actually the name of one particular orc, but is a title used by many over the course of the history of Middle-earth. It was first used by the Maiar, who were angelic spirits of a lesser stature than the Valar, who were chosen to serve Morgoth when they transformed into the first versions of orcs. Later, during the First Age, the name was taken by an orc chieftain who led a massive invasion force against the hidden kingdom of Doria under King Thingol. The purpose of this invasion was to capture Thingol's daughter, Luthien, for his master, Morgoth. The orcs couldn't fully enter the realm of Doria thanks to an enchanted barrier cast across its border by their queen Melian, the Maiar. Thingol would, however, muster his entire might and ride into battle against Balrog with his great captains Mablung and Beleg by his side. The orc leader would fight the king using an iron spear, but would eventually be slain by Thingol, who wielded the sword Aran Ruth. After his death, his forces would be routed and defeated. But placing Balrog at a power level of 7000, not just because of the powerful Maiar that took this name, but also the orc that was audacious enough to challenge the might of one of the elven kings of the First Age. So serious was his threat that Thingol thought it was worthy enough for him to crush it with his full might. Also to be noted is that this orc must have been indeed powerful enough for Morgoth to entrust such a critical mission into the hands of an orc and not a Maiar, like Sauron or the Balrogs under his command. It's therefore fair to say that Balrog's spot is warranted in this list.
The scum tried to knife me! Kill him!
Shagrat and Gorbag, level 5000. We've decided to give a joining power level ranking of 5000 to these orcs due to their similarities and intertwined fates, which we're about to discuss. Around the year 3019 of the Third Age, as the War of the Ring is well and truly underway, Frodo and Samwise are betrayed by Gollum as they venture into Cirith Ungol, the haunt of the giant spider Shelob. After attacking Frodo and poisoning him, the spider is defeated by Samwise Gamgee, who laments Frodo's death, not knowing that the spider's venom had just put his master in a death-like state. As he continues to mourn, he's forced to hide as a group of orcs approach the area led by their leaders Shagrat and Gorbag. Upon discovering Frodo and understanding that he's not yet dead, as they're familiar with how Shelob kills her prey, they capture Frodo and take him back to the orc garrison at the Tower of Cirith Ungol for search and torture. There, they discover Frodo's mithril vest, which was given to him by his uncle Bilbo. Gorbag begins deeply coveting the dwarven treasure for himself, due to which a fight breaks out between Shagrat and himself, along with their respective soldiers. In the fight, despite managing to wound Shagrat in the arm, he's slain by his fellow orc. Shagrat's end is, however, left ambiguous, because we know that the Mouth of Sauron presents Frodo's belongings to Aragorn and company as they stand in front of the Black Gate before the final battle. This would imply that Shagrat was able to deliver these things to his superiors. He could have either been slain for being part of the fiasco with Gorbag, or he could have been promoted and marched upon Sauron's enemies in the final battle. While we did contemplate giving them two separate ranks, their entire history and role in the story are so closely intertwined and similar that we'd be repeating much of the same twice, making things redundant. Hence, we placed them in a tie. Regardless, these two orcs play a major role in unwittingly aiding Frodo to trespass into Mordor for the final leg of his journey to cast the One Ring into the fires of Mount Doom. Grishnak, level 4000. Grishnak is the leader of the orcs who confront the previously mentioned Ugluk on his journey with the two hobbits Merry and Pippin to Isengard. In the books, Grishnak seems to be fully aware that one of the hobbits is in possession of his master's One Ring. He tries to persuade Ugluk to take the hobbits to Mordor, but is refused by the Uruk-hai. The orc soon returns with more of his kind and continues to debate with Ugluk on the fate of his prisoners. The two groups, as mentioned earlier, are, however, waylaid by Eomer's riders of Rohan, and chaos ensues. During the chaos, Grishnak tries to escape with the two hobbits, even as Pippin tries to negotiate for their freedom in exchange for information regarding the ring. This goes unheeded by Grishnak, who continues to carry on forward, but he's caught up to and slain by one of the riders, who runs him through with a spear. In the movie, Grishnak is shown debating with Ugluk about something completely different. In the Two Towers film, unlike the books, he seems more focused on wanting to devour the two hobbits rather than taking them back to Mordor. This, again, like in the books, is met with denial by the Uruk-hai, and as mentioned earlier, they're ambushed by the Rohirrim. Grishnak, however, is seemingly obsessed with eating Merry, and Pippin pursues them throughout the fight and into Fangorn Forest, where he's killed by the Ent Treebeard, who stomps him to death. Unlike some of the other minor orcs discussed here, he's an actual orc from the books and not a creation of Peter Jackson. His intervention that delays the advance of Ugluk to Isengard plays a vital role in Aragorn and company venturing into Fangorn Forest in the movies and discovering Gandalf, who had been resurrected from the dead as the White Wizard. They'd then go on to free King Theoden of Rohan from Saruman's spell and expel the traitor Wormtongue from Edoras.
It is rank with it.
Gothmog, level 2500. Not to be confused with Gothmog, the leader of the Balrogs who were slain by Ecthelion during the siege of Gondolin in the First Age of Middle-earth. The Gothmog we're talking about was the Orc lieutenant of the Witch King of Angmar and was in charge of the forces of Sauron that dwelt in the city of Minas Morgul. Gothmog would lead the assault on Minas Tirith during the Battle of Pelennor Field. He'd also be responsible for the sacking of Osgiliath prior to the aforementioned battle. Gothmog is seen to be a cruel and callous orc who shows no care for even his comrades' lives. This is shown when he refuses to let his troops move, despite them getting crushed by the rocks launched at them by the besieged troops of Gondor. His ultimate fate is unknown, but it's most likely that he perished after his master, the Witch King of Angmar, is slain and the tide of battle turns against him. His character really drives home the cruelty and savagery of orcs, even amongst themselves. Therefore, we've placed him here at this spot. Shagrat 1500. For those of you who've watched the movies by Peter Jackson, in the second installment, The Two Towers, you remember the orc who was the leader of Saruman's warg riders. During the movie, we watch him assault the people of Rohan, fleeing from their capital Edoras to their fortress in Helm's Deep. During this skirmish, he's slain by Aragorn, but not before the ranger's hand gets caught in the warg's stirrup before getting dragged off a cliff. With his dying breath, the orc informs Legolas, Gimli, and Theoden that Aragorn had perished after falling off the cliff. As proof, he shows them the necklace given to Aragorn by his lover, Arwen. This orc actually had a name, which was Shagrat. He's another movie-exclusive character created by Peter Jackson for his films, and he makes subsequent appearances in video games based on the franchise. We thought it'd be interesting to bring him to your notice, as he's one of those named characters that pass under everyone's radar. Guritz, level 1000. Guritz is another one of Peter Jackson's creations for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He was an orc captain coordinating with the Corsairs of Umbar, who were meant to travel up the Anduin and attack Gondor's forces from the flank. Unfortunately for him, Aragorn had successfully made a pact with the dead men of Dunharrow, attacked the Corsairs, and took their place. Upon the boats arriving at the Pelagir harbour, he's caught by surprise, as instead of the Corsairs, Aragorn and company emerge from the ships, followed by the army of the dead. Guritz is slain immediately during this onslaught. He's an extremely minor character, but we thought he should be in this list as he's one of the few named orcs in the lore, if one were to consider the movies to be canon. Marvel's verdict is testament to Tolkien's god-tier world building that even orcs, who are primarily foot soldiers of the enemy, have had a significant role to play in the shaping of the history of Middle-earth. We also need to give some credit to Peter Jackson, as there are quite a few of his creations that he added to his movies that do their job of enhancing the mythos of the world that they're set in. Even Amazon Studios' creation, Adar, is one of the most interesting depictions of an orc that breaks all boundaries from what was considered the norm until now. Having come to the end of the video, we thank you for still being here. With The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power Season 2 underway, we'll no doubt be getting to see more of these infernal creatures grace our screens. It'll be interesting to see how the showrunners depict the orcs, as they seem to be already once again breaking conventions. For us though, we're satisfied, as long as you give us more Adar. Sam Hazeldine seems to be doing a great job so far after taking over from Joseph Marl, who portrayed the character in the first season. From Adar to Azog and Shagrat to Shagrat, their contribution to the stories of Middle-earth must be recognized. They're undoubtedly an integral part of Tolkien's legendarium, who are often overlooked for the more grander villains. We hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as we enjoyed making it. We cover extensive lore videos on all things Lord of the Rings on our channel, so be sure to check them out once you're done here. Until next time, stay safe and stay marvelous.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.